Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to head down to England once again and we're going to have a look at a beer from another brewery that I've never tried anything from before. So as I've told you in previous English reviews, there's a very strong beer scene down in England these days, lots of very good breweries, but we're going to go somewhere where I believe we haven't been on the channel before, so that makes it doubly exciting actually. So hopefully this is another good beer, hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. So for this review then, we are going to head to Sheffield in southern Yorkshire, which is almost right in the middle of England actually, if I'm remembering the map correctly, but we're going to have a look at my first beer from St Mars of the Desert. So this one is called the Koel Citra, and apparently there are a few other beers that go by the name Koel using different hops and things like this, but this one comes in at 5.7% ABV. They're describing it as a cool ship IPA, and yeah, it came highly recommended by the guys at Beer Hive through in Edinburgh. So if you find yourself through there, I do recommend that you go and check out their beer shop. A great selection of Scottish stuff, and they've always got really random things in there as well, such as this one. So yeah, this one came highly recommended by Fraser in there, so a big shout out to him in particular for choosing this beer for me to review. So I hope it turns out to be a good one actually. But yeah, he was telling me that this one is a really kind of rustic, interesting, sort of saison-y type IPA. So it really just caught my fancy when he was describing it. He said that he really enjoyed it. So let's have a look at it and see how we go. So, as always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I'll hopefully be able to do in the future from St Mars of the Desert. Like I said, this is the very first time I'm trying one of their beers, but there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlists of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the English beers that I've reviewed for you. That's being added to whenever I get the opportunity, but quite regularly when I'm at home in the motherland of Scotland, because we do get a lot of English beers up here. But as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, on to my brewery notes then to tell you a little bit about St Mars of the Desert. And I will say that this brewery does have quite an interesting and somewhat unusual story actually. So St Mars of the Desert, as I've mentioned to you already, are based in Sheffield in southern Yorkshire down in England, and the company was founded by Dan Paquette and Martha Simpson Holley. So the pair had run the Pretty Things Beer and Ale project, which was based in Somerville near Boston in Massachusetts in New England in the northeast of the US. But Dan had previously spent 15 years working as a brewer, and Martha had a background in science. So when it comes to both this brewery and the Pretty Things one that they used to run, she was the one looking after the yeasts and the quality control and things like this. So a very strong background, but they brewed as a gypsy brewery in the Westport area of Boston from 2008 until 2015. But they said at this point that they just felt really burned out and they wanted to take a break, rebuild and relocate, because the business was really starting to go in a direction that they hadn't expected. They were getting a lot of offers of investment and, you know, building their own brewery and so on. And they just didn't quite want to go in that direction at that time. But after scouting around and then settling on Sheffield in England as their new location, the first beer that they produced under the St Mars of the Desert name was Jack d'Or, which was actually a very popular saison that had been produced by Pretty Things a few years prior, and this beer was released at the end of 2018. But the name of the brewery, St Mars of the Desert, is obviously quite unusual, but this is apparently an inside reference to a location that they had scouted in the south of France, and the desert part of the name is a reference to the Attercliffe neighbourhood in which the brewery is situated, and it was once a thriving industrial area. Sheffield, of course, was very well known for its steel, but it's now kind of deserted and sort of barren apparently. But no doubt with all the kind of start-up initiatives and things going on, that will change over the next few years. But at the brewery itself, they run a 10 hectolitre brew kit which was built by Molsche over in Germany, and they produce around 350 hectolitres of beer per year. But the unique point about this brewery is that they are apparently the only brewery in Yorkshire that are running a cool ship for hopping and settling. So yeah, that has given their beers a really kind of rustic and sort of farmhousey type vibe from what I've heard. So I'm curious to see how that plays out in this beer. But as of November 2021, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced around 85 different kinds of beer according to Untappd under the St Mars of the Desert name. I unfortunately couldn't find out how many beers they produced under the Pretty Things beer and ale project name. That wasn't listed, it just said 0 beers on the Untappd page, unfortunately. But apparently that brewery was critically successful, and I mean, if Dan has 15 years experience as a brewer and then Martha's got a science background, then that is not surprising, to be honest with you. But yeah, that is all I can really tell you about St Mars of the Desert for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can of course check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, that is it. We can get on and have a little taste of this beer itself. But like I said, this one was recommended to me by the guys at Beer Hive. Big shout out to Fraser, of course. I will try to remember to put the link to their Facebook page in the video description for you below, so check them out if you find yourself in Edinburgh. But let's just take a little quick look at the artwork on this one before we open up. This little kind of tree sticky sort of thing here, I'm not sure exactly what it's supposed to be, but this is, I think this, in the article that I was reading, this was some sort of reference to the Pretty Things Ale project, but that is the symbol of the St Mars of the Desert Brewery. But really nice, kind of quite simple artwork there. There you can see the kind of coal ship as part of the kind of background cartoon, if you like. But yeah, it looks very, very nice, this one. 440ml can, of course, and like I said, this Koel series is, there are a few different members of this series, of course. They've got a few different hops and things in them, but this one also contains a little bit of Azaka and also a bit of the New Zealand blend Betty as well. Now, Citra is a hop that we know well. It comes from the US, 14% alpha acid, usually gives you a lot of big mango-y notes and also a big kind of zesty, lemony, limey kind of character quite often. Sometimes you can even get gooseberry and lychees out of it, but yeah, Azaka again is another American hop. That tends to give you a big kind of sharp sort of mandarin-y, tangerine kind of quality in my experience, sometimes a bit of pineapple as well. But the Betty blend is something that I'm not really familiar with. I did actually try to do a little bit of research on this to figure out what hops and things were in it, but that wasn't available. But to be honest, that kind of makes sense, because if you've got, you know, farms developing these different hop blends, they're not really going to publish that on the internet so that other folk can copy them and so on. But yeah, so that is a little bit of background on this beer. From what Fraser was telling me, this one is a little bit like a kind of saison-y, a more hoppy kind of saison kind of thing, sort of saison farmhousey IPA. So yeah, this should be quite interesting. Plain silver top on the can there. I'm not sure exactly how much I paid for this. I think it might have been about £5.50 or £6, so let's just go with £6. So that's going to be somewhere in the region of like €6.50, maybe 65 Swedish kroner, somewhere in the region of like $7.50 American, maybe 8, something like that, just to give those of you watching across the world a little bit of a price reference to go by. But yeah, 5.7% Koel IPA. Let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting then. Very curious to see what it has in store for us. Now, I have to admit, I'm very, very curious to see what this beer is going to be like. The first thing that came to mind when I heard like a sort of Koel IPA, you know, you always think of a sort of farmhousey, kind of sour sort of thing with that. So the thing that was coming to mind with this beer was that it could well be something along the lines of what you might get from Alchemist over in Vermont in the States. So yeah, that could be quite interesting, because I remember a lot of people seem to think that the New England IPAs are only kind of wheaty and bitey and oaty and creamy, such as the Treehouse ones, which are more oaty, and then the Trillium ones, which are more kind of wheaty and bitey. But no, the Alchemist ones, for example, the Heady Topper and the Focal Banger, are a little bit more farmhousey and grainy and things like that, so it can be quite interesting. And of course you've got Lawson's Finest Liquids, which are even a bit more kind of brown sugary leaning, actually, a little bit more like West Coasters and a little bit more bitter as well. So yeah, there's a lot of different interesting aspects to the New England IPA that haven't quite come across to Europe in the same way that you'll find them over in New England, in fact. But yeah, anyway, let's have a little look at the beer itself. So as you can see, when we poured the beer, it had about a 2/3 finger of a frothy, I would say kind of cream coloured head. It's not a perfect white head. If we put the the glass up to the camera and just let it focus a little bit, you can see the lovely kind of medium-sized bubbles on this one. So not the foamiest of heads that you're going to come across, but certainly a nice mix of bubbles in there. That is just fading away to be a very kind of thin foamy layer, but it's leaving a nice ring around the edge of the glass. But yeah, in terms of the colour of this one, I would describe it as being a very kind of bright yellow. It actually does look like a number of the kind of saisons that I've come across, of course. And remember, the saison is a sort of Belgian, French, Dutch, a low country kind of farmhouse beer actually. But yeah, lovely kind of bright yellow colour. This one, if we shine the light through it, it's got a sort of natural haze to it, this one. We haven't got all of the beer in the glass actually, so maybe it will get a little bit more hazy when we put the last of it in before the tasting, but it certainly does look pretty damn nice at the moment. But one or two big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass, a few little ones going up towards the bottom of that head there, but overall, it does look, it does actually look pretty damn nice. So yeah, I think it looks kind of pretty much as you would expect from a saison, to be honest with you. But remember, the colour of your beer depends on one, the type of malts that you use. That usually determines the majority of your EBC rating. The length of your wort boil is also going to play a role. The longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, thus you get a darker colour of beer. Any barrel aging that you do and any adjuncts that you put in can also affect this, of course. When it comes to this one, I'm not sure if the coolship will have an effect, of course, because usually the coolship is just a way to let, you know, like airborne yeasts and things actually come into the beer and flavour it up a little bit, give you a wee bit of that kind of sour tarty sort of thing. But yeah, the colour of this one is kind of what you would expect for a modern IPA, if we can call it that, or even a saison, a farmhouse type beer. So yeah, nothing overly surprising about the appearance of this one. Then I guess we can take a closer look at the aroma and just see how we go. So let's do it. Have a look at this one. Yeah, it is pretty much like a big kind of hoppy saison, but it actually smells quite oily. That's the first impression that I have of this one. It's a nice big kind of juicy but slightly oily beer. Yeah, I think that goes together really pretty nicely in this one, to be honest with you. Yeah, so it's actually not quite as sort of crackery and farmhousey and stuff like that as I expected it was going to be. It is actually more of a kind of juicy, oily kind of thing, I guess. So yeah, let's just break this one down then in the aroma and just see how we go. I'm going to put the rest of it in the can at the moment. You can see it has hazed up a little bit, but there's no real sediment visible in this one as we in the bottom of the can as we put the rest of it in. But it certainly does look pretty nice actually. So you can see, I don't know if you guys can see that, it is slightly more hazy than it was, but not massively much. But yeah, let's take a closer look at that aroma now that it's got everything in it and just see how it goes. So we'll sugar it up a little bit. So backbone of the beer, you can definitely get a little bit of a sort of Jacob's cream cracker kind of thing out of this, but you can smell like a really soft white bread, like very light, almost crisp white bready character out of this one. It kind of smells like these hedgehog rolls a little bit that you get out of the supermarket. It's kind of like that, but not quite as spicy, I would say. Definitely a soft white bread, just a light kind of bread crust in there, and definitely some of that kind of Jacob's cream crackery thing going on in the malt backbone. But yeah, there's not too much else actually to report in the malt base there. Maybe just a teeny little bit of woodiness. I don't know if this has got a bit of wheat or oat or anything like that in it. Let me just check the ingredients. Does it say? No. It says it's suitable for vegans, but it doesn't tell you. Oh no, it does have oats, barley, oats, and wheat in it. So yeah, it does have that there. So yeah, there are some barley and wheaty, barley, oats, and wheat notes in there. But yeah, barley, of course, is the usual malt. I'm just talking rubbish there. But yeah, I wouldn't say that either of those two things are overly present in the aroma, to be honest with you. To me, it really comes across as more sort of farmhousey. But the thing is, in a regular kind of New England IPA, you would pick up a little bit of the wheaty bitiness at the back of the nose, and you'd also get a little bit of a kind of creamy oaty kind of character in the middle of the nose, I would say. But you don't get all that much of that. You can get a little bit of smoothness from the oats in it, but it's not madly, it's not overly detectable, if that makes sense. But yeah, the malty yeasty side of this beer is actually quite nice. It's actually quite subtle in the way that it goes together. So I'm curious to see how that's going to translate into the aroma. There maybe is a very slight touch of there maybe is a very kind of slight touch of sweetness to this one in the malt base itself. Maybe a little wee bit of like a very slight Werther's Original kind of butter candy sort of thing. Maybe a tiny little bit of McVitie's Digestive Biscuit, something like that. But other than that, the malt base is actually quite subtle. Malty and yeasty base, I should say, is quite subtle and quite smooth. Let's just take a little look at the hoppy side of the beer and see how we go. So when we sugar it up a little bit, hoppy side of things is, again, the green component on this one is pretty subtle, but there's a nice juicy fruitiness to it, so we'll come to that in a minute. But on the green side of things, there's a teeny little bit of a smooth earthiness, a little bit of floral aromaticity, and a bit of a kind of lighter grassiness there. Now, both the floral aromaticity and the grassy side of things are actually quite fresh and quite wet in the aroma that they give off. But it's not really, it's not overly pungent, if that makes sense. I find this whole beer quite relaxed and quite subtle in a way. So let's look at the fruity side of it. For me, the fruity side of the beer is quite, the fruity side of the beer is quite, quite oily and juicy in a sense. I do get the mangoes from the Citra for sure. There is a little bit of that kind of lemon, limey, zesty kind of thing from the Citra as well. But there is just a wee bit of that kind of mandarin-y, tangerine-y orange. So I really like how that, I do really like how that side of the beer goes together too. Maybe a little bit of pineapple also. But yeah, aroma-wise, this one, I do think this one goes together really quite well in a lot of ways. So yeah, this is actually a very, very nice beer from the aroma side of things. So as I always say, take a bit of time to ponder over the aroma before you get stuck into it, because I think this one will show you a different side to what we normally get from IPAs these days. So thumbs up to St. Mars of the Desert for that. But I think it's about time that we try this one then. So this one is the Coolship Citra, or the Coolit Citra, sorry, the Coolit Citra. Coolship IPA coming in at 5.7% ABV from St. Mars of the Desert in Sheffield, Southern Yorkshire, down in England. Let's get stuck into this one. Slàinte, skål, and cheers. Yeah, that's actually, it's a really nicely done beer. It's just pretty damn solid. By no means is this going to blow the head off you by being overly sweet, big and bitey, or just like really creamy or anything like this. It's just really, you can just tell that it's just a very, very well crafted beer actually. So it gets a big thumbs up from me. I have to admit, I would be curious to try some of the other things that they're doing actually. So I'll need to have a wee rake through the list of things on Untappd. I had there about 85 if memory serving me correctly. So yeah, it would be quite cool to have a rake through these and just and see what other things they've got. But that's a really nice, just drinkable beer, this one. If I was to taste it blind, I'm not sure that I would pick up this was an IPA. I don't know what I would think this was. But whatever, we can maybe argue about the style and things like this all day long, but it is quite nice. Closest thing I've come to this one recently would actually be the Ad Infinitum that I reviewed a few videos back from Epochal Brewery, who are a new kind of barrel-aged, they call themselves Epochal barrel fermented ales. It's actually quite similar to that. It's like a sort of, farmhousey kind of hoppy golden ale, this one actually, but I like it. I do like this one, so I'll need to see if I can get hold of a few other things from them and see how they go down. But I like this, so worth trying. Definitely worth trying this. So, first impression of it is it's quite a smooth but still quite slick and just easy drinking beer. This one at 5.7% though, it's not going to blow the head off you. So let's try and break the flavour of this one down for you and just describe it a wee bit more kind of succinctly. So, on the kind of malty and yeasty side of things then, and I'm going to sneeze, wait now. and I hope I don't end up sneezing 10 times, which I often do when I sneeze once, and it's very annoying. If I do, I might need to just pause the video. But anyway, so first with the flavour then. So malty and yeasty side of this beer is actually quite slick in a lot of ways. Straight away across the middle of your palate, you get this sort of this slightly dry Jacob's cream crackery smoothness. That goes across the middle third of your palate and the back third of your palate. But for the moment, let's focus on the middle third of your palate. So in there, nice smooth middle third of your palate. On top of that, you get a soft white bready kind of character for sure, which I do like, but it's very thin on the white bready note actually, and like I was saying from the aroma, it's actually quite a crisp hedgehog loaf type white bread that you get from this one. So yeah, that goes together very nicely in this one. Now you will notice there are one or two little bread crusty elements in there as well. You do get one or two little elements of that grainy side of things, but towards the front of that middle third of your palate, you will get a little bit of a kind of white, underneath the white bread, you will get one or two little woody, grainy sort of things out of it. The oaty side of this beer, you can get a little bit of oatiness out of it, like down the middle line of your tongue. You've almost got that little trench in the middle of your tongue, as I always say, but you can feel just a little bit of smooth oaty character. It's like a circle in the middle of your palate, just going down that middle kind of trench of your tongue, if you like. So on top of that, there is a little bit of a kind of Werther's Original butter candy, butterscotchy type flavour. There's definitely a wee bit of that going on in this beer, but it's very, to be honest, it's very, very minimal. You might just detect a little smattering of a kind of McVitie's digestive biscuity character coming out of this one towards the extremities of that middle third of your palate. But other than that, there's not much else to say about the middle third of your palate in this one, other than the fact that the slight breadiness gets a wee bit more grainy towards the back third of your towards the border with the back third of your palate. So let's move on to that then. So the border region between the middle third and back third of your palate, you get a wee bit of a kind of bread crusty build up there. Then the base of that back third of your palate, there's certainly a wee bit more of a kind of graininess to the Jacob's cream crackery sort of stuff. You can feel a little touch of bitiness from the wheat, but I stress it's not overly big, but you can feel a little bit more of the smoothness of the wheat coming out there. You do get a little bit of that more grainy white bread on top of that. And then on top of all that, you do get a little bit of the kind of yeasty character. So the yeast does have a wee bit of that kind of doughy, white bready character to it. A little bit dry, a little bit sort of crackery again, and very slightly woody and farmhousey and stuff like that. But the yeasty presence in this beer isn't overly big, if you like. It is the sort of rusticy part of this beer. They use that word in their on their website quite a lot. It's rustic beers that they do. I would say that this beer really is more kind of crackery, like a Jacob's cream cracker rather than anything else, but there are wee hints of wood and farmhousey yeast and stuff like that in it, but it's very, very well done. But on the back third of your palate, you just, on top of the white bready notes, there is that kind of bit of doughy yeast there. So on the back third of your palate, the flavour is a little bit taller, but then as you come further forward, it just condenses down. Then into the middle third of your palate, the flavours just are a bit more kind of squashed together actually. So yeah, it works out pretty nicely. I think we can go on and have a wee look at the hoppy side of the beer then, just to kind of round off. So yeah, on the hoppy side of things then, we'll start with the green component as we always do, but in the back corners of the palate, you've got a nice little bit. You do have a little touch of earthiness there, but as you go further forward from that, maybe there's a wee hint of a herbal note, but as you go further forward, you certainly get a little bit more of a kind of floral aromaticity out of this one. And I would stress again that the floral aromaticity in this beer is quite wet. It's not really pungent or dank or bitter or anything like this. It is just quite fresh and wet. So that to me would indicate that the majority of hopping in this beer is either late addition or dry hopping, because this beer it's just not overly big and kind of spicy, to be honest with you. And remember, it's the early edition hops that will give you a lot of the bitterness. You get those in West Coast IPAs, but then the late edition hops give you a little bit of bitterness, and then the dry hopping, if you like, brain's not working, that gives you pretty much no bitterness added after the the boil is complete. So New England IPAs tend to have a good bit of late addition and dry hopping, whereas West Coast IPAs have that, but also have the early addition hops. But round the front curve of the palate, on this one you get a nice little bit of a lighter grassy sort of thing, and it is just a little bit of that kind of wet, freshly cut grass that I was talking about earlier. So green component on this one is just quite nice and smooth, and it's very in keeping with the vibe of the rest of the beer. So yeah, again, it gets my approval. But let's look at the front third of your palate then, and the fruity side of the beer to round everything up. So border region between front third and middle third of your palate, again, you get a wee bit of that bread crusty build up there. The base of the front third of your palate is, again, that sort of smooth Jacob's cream crackery kind of maybe a little bit of a hint of that white bready character we've spoken about quite often in the video. But on top of that, you get that nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. Now at the back of that front third of your palate, you're getting a wee bit of the pungency of the tropical fruits from the Citra, of course. I think the Citra obviously will be the main hop in this one, there's no doubt about that. But yeah, you do get a tiny little hint of that slightly more pungent passion fruity note that Citra can give you. But when you come further forward from that, it gives you a really juicy but quite oily mango. Actually, is the way that the fruits come out in this beer is a little bit more akin to a West Coast IPA than a New England. I would stress that in this beer too. It's a more oily fruity character rather than the kind of soft juicy sort of thing that you get in this. But as you push towards the middle of that front third of your palate, you get a bit more of a kind of apricot-y kind of thing. There's definitely a wee bit of a pineapple-y note coming out of it for me as well. On the front half of that front third of your palate, it's almost a little bit, there is a wee touch of like a gooseberry kind of thing, and you can pick up a wee bit of the kind of orangey, oily kind of thing from the Azaka as well, maybe a wee bit of the pineapple, but it's a bit difficult to pinpoint exactly what the Betty is doing, to be honest with you. It almost just gives you a wee bit of a kind of gooseberry type vibe just behind the very kind of front tip of the tongue. Let's just take another wee look at that and see if we can get anything else. Yeah, maybe it's just adding a bit of, these I think it's maybe contributing a little bit of the kind of sort of drier tropical fruits, like a bit of the kind of apricot-y, papaya, mango-y sort of thing. That's really what I'm getting out of this one rather than anything else. So yeah, I think it's really quite nice and from that perspective as well. But yeah, it's a really, really solid beer, this one, from the fruity side of things. And the further you go into the aftertaste, you get more of these kind of nice dry fruits out of it. But stylistically, yeah, it is. As I say, it has a little bit of the kind of paleo vibe to it in a sense. It's almost as drinkable as like a slightly. It's got a similar vibe. And I think this is a good point to go into the mouthfeel. So mouthfeel wise, I would say this one's actually quite similar to like a West Coast pale ale. It reminds me actually of a few of the pale ales that I've had from New Barnes Brewery through in Edinburgh. It's really kind of like some of those. But yeah, it's quite an oily and slick beer, this one. The water side of it feels very clean. So a nice little bit of slickness, smooth carbonation to it. In terms of IBUs, I think this is pretty low. I think this is about 20 IBUs, maybe 25 at the most. It's something like that. Not going to blow the head off you in terms of bitterness. The malt base, as we've said, is very smooth, and the yeastiness is like that as well. There's a little bit of dryness out of it the further you go into the aftertaste. But yeah, just a little tiny touch of sweetness in the malt base too. But the fruity side of it leans towards the oily side of things. You do get a little bit of fruity dryness out of the beer as well. But I certainly like how this one goes together actually. So yeah, it gets a big thumbs up from me in this one. I've just noticed on the can as well that it says Holly Paquette. So maybe the name that I mentioned with her earlier on is actually her maiden name, so maybe I told you lies, so I do apologise about that actually if I've got the names wrong there. I need to check that for the next video now, but regardless, she's produced a very, very nice beer, we have to say. So yeah, I think we can round off at that with this one. I hope you guys enjoyed my take on this beer. So as always, thank you for watching. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comments section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from St Mars of the Desert. Hopefully we can try a few more of their beers, but check out my social media, check out their social media, And I'll catch you guys on the next one. This was the Koel Citra, a 5.7% Koelship IPA with Citra hops, obviously, from St Mars of the Desert in Sheffield in southern Yorkshire down in England. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Slange at Skull, cheers, and thank you to the guys at Beer Hive for this recommendation. Cheers just now.